It's March the 29th, 2021, and we start today in the book of Judges, chapter 1. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?" The Lord answered, "Judah is to go. I've given the land into their hands." Then the men of Judah said to the Simeonites, their brothers, "Come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours." So the Simeonites went with them. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adonai Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adonai Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adonai Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them." They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. After that, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there, they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer, and Caleb said, "I will give my daughter Achsah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer." Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Achsah to him in marriage. One day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you've given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." Then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms with the men of Judah to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev, near Arad. Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their brothers, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore it was called Hormah. The men of Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. As Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the 3 sons of Anak. The Benjamites, however, failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. Now the house of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are treated well." So he showed them, and they put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. But Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan, or Taanach, or Dor, or Ibleam, or Megiddo, and their surrounding settlements, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. When Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, but the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron, or Nahalol, who remained among them, but they did subject them to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko, or Sidon, or Arlab, or Aksib, or Helba, or Aphek, or Rehob. And because of this, the people of Asher lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. Neither did Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh, or Beth Anath, but the Naphtalites too lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land, and those living in Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became forced laborers for them. The Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. The Amorites were determined also to hold out in Mount Perez, Ajalon, and Shalbim. But when the power of the house of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. The boundary of the Amorites was from Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. Amen. We move straight on now from the death of Joshua, referred to in verse 1, confronted again by this puzzle that there are so many Canaanites still living in the land. I thought they'd all been destroyed and driven out. That's the impression you could get through a superficial reading. Certainly, the Israelites invaded and conquered, had spectacular victories. But we'll see that now the land has to be occupied, and there are natives still in the land which have to be subdued. And so the inquiry comes in verse 1, who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? And the answer, verse 2, interestingly, is this: the Lord answered, Judah. Judah is to go. Now, all the way along, let me find it for you. Here is our little map again. It's rather important for us as we think again about the land and its occupation. J stands for Judah, the largest tribe numerically and I think geographically in the south. So I want you to see that. And little Simeon is kind of folded in to Judah just beneath it. And all the way along, we've seen this growth and progress of Judah, becoming stronger and stronger, bigger and bigger. And again, given priority here. Remember now, Judah was never the firstborn son of Jacob, was he? And yet increasingly, how Judah, the man and now the tribe, has grown in stature. And most of the first half of this chapter is about Judah, verses 1 to 20, who, along with Simeon, verse 3, and I've explained why they kind of work together, they enjoy now, with God's help, one stunning victory after another. Verse 4, just look at that. Note the numbers there. It is extraordinary. Verse 8, they attack Jerusalem. Jerusalem will become their base, and so important in the future history of Israel. And then verse 9, we see how they're going up and down the country and getting one great success after another. Of course, Caleb is mentioned again, verses 11 to 15. This great warrior, he's always mentioned in association with the men of Judah. Perhaps you remember that from Joshua, chapter 14 and verse 6. But, verse 19, but for all their greatness and all their success and all their power and all their glory, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains. We're told why? Because they had iron chariots. Well, what difference does that make? So what? With God on their side, and if they are fully in obedience to his law and fulfilling his covenant, the Israelites, they were invincible. I mean, they really were. So how come, after all these stunning successes, now this little note of failure? The second half of the chapter is 21 to 36. It's very similar. Now the tribes that are mentioned here, look at verse 22, the house of Joseph. Now the house of Joseph, the sons of Joseph were Ephraim and Manasseh. So there's Ephraim in the middle, and there's Manasseh on the west. So now we're dealing with the western tribes, the central tribes, and more now the northern tribes. All the ones that are mentioned from here on are mostly northern. And we see a similar pattern, although whereas before it was mostly success with a little bit of failure. Here, it's a little bit of success, verses 22 to 26, with a lot of failure. Verse 27, but Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan. And as we read through verse 28, they never drove them out completely, nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer. Verse 29, they did not, they subjected them to forced labor, yeah, but they didn't drive them out. And again, and again, and again, and again. That's the flavor. That's the description we get now. A catalogue of one weakness, of one failure, of one compromise after another, ending with verse 36. Don't miss this. The boundary of the Amorites was from Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. So there's like a partition. They are bound, they have a boundary, they're partitioned off, and they're allowed to carry on and do whatever they want. This is not the occupation that was envisaged back with Joshua. They'd made a great start, and now it should be just a mopping up operation. But how can this be? Isn't this puzzling? Especially when you think of what the Lord had said back in Joshua 23 and verse 5. The Lord your God himself will drive them out of your way. He will push them out before you, and you will take possession of their land as the Lord your God promised you. Well, it's not happening at the moment, is it? Why? Just wait around. We'll find the answer tomorrow. So the greatest and the best efforts of the Old Testament, the biggest, the most powerful tribe of Judah, however brilliant they were, however effective they were, however victorious they were not perfect. They made mistakes. They failed, and they fell in so many ways. And when that is the case, either we see it just by reading the Old Testament, or we see it in life, sometimes with church leaders, sometimes in our personal lives. People let us down, people make mistakes. It can be very hurtful, very disappointing, very depressing. Some people find the Old Testament like that. They just avoid it. No, we don't do that. Because when God was with them, when they were obedient to the covenant and the promises, and they were in submission, they were invincible. But it's when they begin to fall away and they don't listen and they don't obey, that's when all the problems start. And all of that is to point us in this direction into the New Testament, to remember to gaze upon the coming Messiah. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 14. Interestingly, look what it says there. For it is clear that our Lord, Jesus Christ, descended from Judah. However great the tribe and the men of Judah were, they were not perfect, and they had all these failings that we can see. But there is one from the tribe of Judah who is perfect. And in fact, earlier on in that chapter 7 of Hebrews, verse 11, it speaks of perfection, which can indeed be attained through him. That's what we've got to remember, my friends, as we read through the book of Judges now, full of horrific failure and decline amongst the people of God. Even the men of Judah will see. They are far from perfect. We must fix our eyes upon the one who is perfect and the one who can make us perfect.